Hey guys, what's going on? John here from What's Spinning, here tonight to chat about this new Sufjan Stevens album, The Ascension. Sufjan Stevens, Detroit-based singer-songwriter who, to be honest, took a while to grow on me. His early days have always been a little bit too far out there for me. I was never that into his A Sun Came debut album. I thought it was a little too lo-fi, and I never really was into his folktronica work either, the Enjoy a Rabbit project. However, ever since the early 2000s, Sufjan has really hit a creative stride, really started pumping out some very well-written, very ambitious folk albums. His Michigan album, honestly, I don't think it gets enough credit. I think it's pretty magnificent. I love the very solemn, very quiet Seven Swans and the over-the-top, grandiose, epic, and pretty damn timeless Illinois. I did like a lot of what Sufjan was doing for quite some time. However, there was also a lot of really weird side projects and vanity projects of his that I just wasn't into. Little projects like the BQE. There was that Avalanche, Illinois B-list project I wasn't that into. The tons of Christmas EPs he's done. He has done a lot of EPs and side projects and in-between projects that just have been very hit and miss with me. And while a lot of people were into the Age of Odds, honestly, it just wasn't for me, although I do admire how creative it is. So much so that for a while I was kind of worried that I was off track with Sufjan, but I did enjoy his Carrie and Lowell album quite a bit. I thought it was probably one of his best albums. So Sufjan is back with his new album, The Ascension. It is an hour and 20 minutes, and I just kind of went into it dry. I just didn't listen to any singles leading up to this thing. Wanted to really just go in with a fresh mind. Let's chat about it. This album starts off with Make Me an Offer I Can't Refuse. Honestly, I think this is a fantastic intro. Like I said, I've always been a little bit more iffy on the more electronic side of Sufjan Stevens, but this is pretty glorious. It's actually a really interesting contrast between this very hectic, very busy instrumental and the very sorrowful, tear-jerking even vocals from Sufjan. I think it's just a great sound all around. Not only that, but this track, from beginning to end, just seems like a very well thought out journey. And I love how wild it gets through the finale. Actually, this just really excites me. This is the sound that I wish Sufjan stuck with this whole entire album. I love Run Away With Me as well. As a matter of fact, this very glistening atmosphere on this track kind of goes across this whole album, and I really love that. It's actually super lovely as it is when you bring in Sufjan's very tear-jerking performance once again. It's just drop-dead gorgeous. Overall, this is a pretty hectic, very fuzzed out, even exhausted sounding album at parts, but with tracks like this, Sufjan makes a pretty damn good argument that this is the sound. Not only that, but there's just a timeless feeling to this track buried deep inside this hectic, hazy instrumental. I love this track. I mean, for the more electronic side of Sufjan, a lot of this album is pretty great. Man, this is also just like a super lonely sounding album. Not even from a distance, when you really dig into the lyrics, and tracks like Video Game are a major reason for that. This actually probably is my favorite track here. You know what, when I first heard it, I didn't know what to think about it. But now, this track just kind of blends very well with the album. Now, I will say this is one of the most standard, standalone tracks on the album. I mean, this is just a true blue dreary synth pop Indietronica track. But Sufjan makes it his own very easily too. The lyrical performance here is absolutely gorgeous. I love this. Lamentations, on the other hand, is a lot busier. It's a lot heady sounding. But no matter how colorful and bouncy this track gets, or this album gets, Sufjan's vocals just really take it down a few pegs and really evens it out. And for now, it continues to be a really fascinating contrast. These tracks just feel so full of life when at first listened, but upon doing a little digging, they are exhausted. It's actually really telling and just catchy enough. And Ursa Major is also a really nice surprise. I feel like from a distance this should be a track that I absolutely hate. It has a lot of the elements that I don't like about this album, like the bulkier production and the busier instrumental. But Sufjan's performance here is showing him a lot more front and center, and that really sells it for me. Not only that, but his vocal performance here is one of his coolest here. I mean, he sounds so sleek. Now, while I will say this, from a distance, this sound is pretty great for Sufjan Stevens. However, it is a slippery slope, meaning when it is bad, trust me, it's really bad. Tell Me You Love Me is such a drag. Now, like some of the earlier tracks here, there is a simplicity to this track that's actually kind of nice, even a little old school at parts, but this instrumental is so sluggish. There really isn't anything to pick up on here as far as the instrumental goes, even though it's not that far off from where we've been so far. That's what I mean. This album is a real slippery slope, and that goes double for Die Happy. This track is so freaking boring. The contrast on this album between the very heady, hectic instrumentals and Sufjan's very personal, very dreary performances has been pretty cool. And not only is this track depressing, but it's hard to sit through. 2 minutes here feels like 2 years. It doesn't progress at all. Some of the instrumentals that eventually pop in are exciting, but this track sounds exhausted and not in the kind of cool way that the rest of this album does. And it even shows us, like the first time here, that Sufjan just completely gets overshadowed by everything else around him, and it's a disaster. There is a ton going on here. Bustling synths, a very heady, eclectic instrumental, but then we get Sufjan's performance here, which is one of his most phoned in. Eventually, it does pick up, but there's nothing here that he hasn't done earlier on this album a lot more interesting. He had a really interesting sound going on for a while, but now he just seems lost again. And the rest of this album, I know is going to probably upset a lot of people. It's very middle of the road for me. There's a lot of great tracks, but there's also a lot of very disappointing ones. Landslide is really interesting. This takes a break from these very animated, very busy instrumentals for a much dreamier one. Actually pretty whimsical and a really nice breakup for the album. It's just so warm and syrupy and easily one of the catchiest tracks here. But then we have tracks like Gilgamesh, which starts off with this super cool sort of Twilight ambient sound that I thought was really great. It almost has like a Radiohead Kid A vibe to it. But as this track goes on, it completely falls apart. His vocals never seem up to snuff with anything else going on here, plus the production here kind of falls apart. I still really love the atmosphere of this track though and how chilly it is, so I can't write this track off completely. I have a lot of the same issues with Death Star. The clunky production, once again, it sounds like Sufjan mixed this himself in a trash can. Even with that, there are some elements here that are really cool. I love the hypnotic vocals and that sort of futuristic beat here. I want to love this track, but that shoddy production is not for me. Goodbye to All That is just as clunky and disappointing. This just kind of sounds like it was thrown together super quickly. I kind of felt like Sufjan was beyond all of this. However, my mixed feelings on this album continue to make themselves known. While I hate the production here so much, Sufjan's vocals here and lyrics are absolutely masterful. I mean, you might like the rest of this track, but this noisier, more eclectic side of Sufjan has never really been for me. Take into consideration at this point, we're well over an hour into this album, and seeing a 7-minute monolith like Sugar coming at you is pretty terrifying, but honestly, it's easily one of the best tracks here. It's a little bit more laid back. There's a serious ambient groove here. I love that. Once again, maybe some Kid A vibes from Radiohead. It's that sort of Twilight, very nocturnal sounding Indietronica. And when Sufjan eventually comes in halfway through the track, he meshes wonderfully. A lot of the same vibes carry over onto the Ascension. And as far as his atmosphere goes, he nails it. But for me, I'm kind of not into his sleepy performance here. It's a little bit too dreary. That also just might be me. I mean, this is a long album. I am exhausted by now. But lyrically, this is stunning. Visually, he has nailed it again. And for what it's worth, America as a finale, if it's not the best track here, it's the second best track. Every single element that I have enjoyed on this album shows up here in spades. It's sweet and it's endearing, but it's also a gigantic statement. Not only that, but I love how mysterious and whimsical it is. And this track is over 12 minutes long. It is exhausting, but it is a pretty fantastic finale. So you know what? This new album from Sufjan Stevens, from a distance, is terrifying to me. I've never been into his more electronic, heady experiments. That's just not where I like to hear him. However, a good chunk of this album really shows him locking into these eclectic, busy beats, but contrasting them alongside very lovelorn and very tragic lyrics that make for some pretty great experiments. Now, I will say this. When this album is bad, it's genuinely unlistenable, and some of the production does fall off in the end, but I still think the good outweighs the bad on this album. For an album that I was terrified to listen to because of its length and because of my history with Sufjan's more electronic tinge stuff, it's pretty damn good. I'm feeling a light 7 on this, but let me know what you guys think down below. If you like the video, be sure to give us a like, give us a subscribe, and let me know down below what you would like for me to chat about in the future. And until next time, have a great day, guys.